All right, good afternoon. Welcome. This is Krista King Oaks, Youth Services Consultant with the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives. You are at the webinar titled Preventing Violence Together 101. Just a couple of reminders before we get going today. KDLA archives all of their online trainings and webinars, so please give us about 1 week turnaround before accessing a recording as well as receiving your continuing education certificate. If you would not mind to stick around for a couple of minutes at the end of today's training to help fill out a survey, we would greatly appreciate it. Those of you who are listening to the recording can also access that survey. It helps us to maintain our federal funding support to continue providing quality training experiences, and we want to thank the Institute for Museum and Library Services for their financial support. If at any time this afternoon you have difficulty with the technology or if the sound goes out, please indicate in the chat box that you need assistance, and myself or my colleague, Alicia McGrath, with our continuing education support team, will provide assistance. With that, I'm going to transition over into today's presentation. Oh, 1 moment, please. I'm getting an odd message on my end that says our training suite has stopped working. So 1 moment, please. I'm very sorry about this. I'm going to mute myself while we get this problem fixed. Sorry for the technical difficulties. This is Krista at KDLA. If anyone can hear us, can you please indicate so in the chat box? Perfect. Thank you. Sorry about that. Does look like our recording is still persistent, so that is good. Yeah, not sure, Charlie. It just was an a Windows Explorer message that said Adobe Connect has stopped working, and Windows was trying to find a solution, and it bounced us out. So, looks like we are back and we are live. I don't know if I should end the recording and start over again. Any recommendations? And sorry for those of you listening. I really appreciate your patience. All right, we are good. Well, we're just going to keep on going then. It's a Monday, so happy Monday to everybody. And with that, we're just going to move on into the introductions. So you know a little bit about myself. I'd like to introduce our co-presenter and main star behind today's webinar, Lori Drogi. She is the Green Dot Coordinator with the Women's Crisis Center in Northern Kentucky, and some of you all may be familiar or at least have seen her name if you've attended a KPLA conference in the past couple of years or the YALSA symposium that was in Louisville last year. I'll let Lori introduce herself a little bit more.
Hey guys, I am super happy to see so many people on the call, and I'm really happy to have the opportunity to chat with all of you. Some of you guys might have seen me, like Krista said, at various other conferences that have to do, that library professionals would attend, and I just feel very grateful to be welcomed into this space because one of the things that I believe in more than anything is building safer communities, and I think libraries have such a crucial, or they play such a crucial role in that. So yeah, I'm pretty happy to be here. I've been doing this work for almost 10 years now. I started in Louisville, Kentucky, and now I'm back here in Northern Kentucky because I grew up in Covington. and I do this work because I want a safer future for everybody. You can see in my picture there's a little girl. Her name is Sydney. She's my niece, and I think very specifically about her when I do this work. I don't want her to be facing the same numbers that our high school students are facing right now. So.
Thank you so much, Lori. So you can see I don't have as sweet of a picture as Lori.
That picture is awesome, though.
That was from a summer reading program a few years ago where we had some special critters join us. But my connection to this topic, and we'll get into a little bit more about what Green Dot means because we asked that question while you all were waiting for us to start today. But before I was in library world, when I was a student at the University of Kentucky, I was in the first class that founded our campus crisis center, Women in Crisis Center. So for me, this has been a very rewarding experience to bring this information full circle. And I really take a lot of those memories and those experiences in training teens and young adults on the college campus into how I perceive services for teens and young adults in the public library world. So I hope that today will be a very valuable and kind of a unique training compared to what we typically do in library world with programs and outreach services. And so with that, I'm going to let Lori cover a little bit about our goals and what we'll be discussing and learning today.
Okay, so we do have some goals set out. So at the very basic level, I would love for you guys to leave this training with like an understanding of the prevalence of different kinds of violence in Kentucky. I know that there are people from all over Kentucky on this call, so we have Kentucky numbers. A basic knowledge of a few different strategies that you guys can engage in to address violence and build resilience. So Krista has mentioned Green Dot a couple of times. That's the strategy that I coordinate, but Krista's also going to talk about a few different things that she has seen done and that she has done herself that help contribute to safer communities. And then we also want you guys to leave with at least one action step to address violence prevention in your own libraries. And I think with this webinar format, we kind of have a really unique opportunity because at the very beginning we introduced this as Preventing Violence Together 101. So in October, we'll be having a 201, and so that'll be our chance to get back together and see, hey, how have things been going? So we want you guys to have at least one action step. And then also multiple resources where you can access further information and support. Krista and I are always here for you guys, but there are also really, really great resources out there on the internet that you can go to for ideas and for maybe if something kind of crisis-oriented happens and you need help in accessing support around that or referring your students out to that. So we'll have those kind of towards the end.
Thanks so much, Lori. Before we move into the rest of the slideshow, are there any questions? You can indicate questions or thoughts now and any time throughout today's training in the chat box.
Yes, and we love questions, so please feel free to ask them.
Thoughts, discussions, examples of things going on in your library. So with that, we're going to kick off today's webinar, just clarifying a few definitions for you. You heard Lori mention resilience, and that's really what we want to encourage through just kind of imagining this lens of offering teen programming, but we can't talk about resilience without talking about risk factors. So risk factors are things that make it more likely that someone may experience some sort of negative outcome. In this case, it's violence. Some of you all, if you've heard a variation of this talk before, or maybe involved in your early childhood community councils or any kind of organizing work around children and youth, may have heard of the term ACEs. If you have heard that term before, we would really be interested to know. You can indicate that in the chat box. For those of you unfamiliar, the acronym stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And we won't spend a lot of time on it because we do have some resources for you in the handouts that you can download again at the end of today's training. It includes a really great URL to go to a website called aces2high.com that you can watch a 5-minute video for more background on that. But instead of focusing on negativity and risk factors, instead what we would like to highlight through today's discussion and the different frameworks for teen programming is how to imbue resilience factors into the youth that you work with. And so resilience factors are things that make it less likely that someone will experience violence in their personal life.
And one of those big resilience factors that I look at is having an adult, a relationship with adults outside of your parents, having a strong sense of community. Those are both resilience factors, things that kind of protect against the experience of violence. And those are things that I think libraries provide a lot of, genuinely.
Absolutely.
So we're going to do some participation questions, kind of. The reason that I'm going to ask these next and upcoming questions is just to get a feel for who is participating in this call. What is your experience? What do you bring to the table? What kinds of things have you seen? So the question, and you'll just be able to answer this, I don't know if it's in the center of your, it's in the side, right-hand side of your screen. So the question is, have you or the librarians that you serve ever worked with a teen patron who has been affected by poverty, homelessness, depression, suicide, substance abuse, dating violence, sexual assault, or bullying? I realize that that's a lot of options, but we wanted to make sure that we were inclusive.
And you should be able to see the results live on your screen as everyone is voting. So it looks like almost all of us have voted. We're just waiting for maybe 1 or 2 more people. So it looks like over 77% of you have directly worked with a young patron who has been touched by one of these experiences.
Okay. That's pretty big. That's not necessarily surprising. That's pretty common.
We're going to end that poll and move into a second part. And again, this will be a new question.
So we'll go ahead and read the question as she's pulling the poll over. Was that teen's sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, or socioeconomic status a reason they experienced the above? A, yes, B, no. And it is very possible that you don't know the answer to this, which is also an option. So if we see that only half of you have responded, I'll probably assume that the other half just don't know. And that's okay. Look at that, about half of the people haven't responded.
Yeah, I apologize. I should have made that an option.
No, it's okay. Okay, so it looks like most of us believe that the answer to this question is no. And then some of us, it looks like probably almost as many people don't really know. The reason that I asked this question is because sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, and lower socioeconomic status, these are all risk factors. So these are things that make somebody more likely or more vulnerable to the experience of violence. So if you have students who come to you, I know in one of the libraries specifically that I work with, there's a specific population of teens who identify as LGBTQ plus on that spectrum, somewhere in that particular community, and they identify the teen librarian as a safe person that they can go to. And so when she's working with them, she has an awareness like, oh, this population that I'm working with, they're probably more likely to be targeted, to experience bullying, or they're more susceptible to sexual assault, to be targeted for one of those things. And dating violence occurs as well. I would say that the poverty and homelessness connection is also very high for different populations. So as we move into this work, I think it's just important for us to realize that these connections are real. Doesn't mean that every person who identifies as gender nonconforming has been the target of something, or anybody with a disability has been the target of something or has experienced violence. But I think we do need to be sensitive when we approach folks of all kinds. We don't know their stories, that anyone could have experienced this.
And this is also something to be very aware of too, just among our own teams and our own colleagues, because that may also influence, everything from people's willingness to serve certain groups or just be put into different situations or customer service reactions on any given day. So while we are explicitly addressing in today's training a teen audience, this information really could be adapted to adults as well.
Oh, for sure. Okay, so our next slide, this is our last slide before we get into strategies and frameworks that help to build those protective or resilience factors. But I'm a firm believer that in order to address a problem, we have to kind of know the scope of the problem and what that problem is. So I wanted to give you guys an understanding of how many teens these particular issues that we're focusing on today are affecting. I forgot where I started that sentence, and so I didn't know what verb tense to use as I was finishing it up. My apologies. So what does this look like across Kentucky? These numbers that you see are all from the 2017 Youth Behavioral Risk Survey. So that is a survey that's done across the nation that allows us to look at Kentucky numbers, but also to put Kentucky numbers against the rest of the nation and see where we fall. So with bullying, what we found is that, and this is in the school year 2017, I believe it's 2016-2017 school year because they just published it. About 22% of students reported that they had been bullied on school property, and about 17% of them had been bullied electronically. These are pretty consistent with the years from with the numbers from the 2015 survey, because they just released these, so I'm still kind of committing these to memory, so I know that they're similar. For dating violence, 12% of high school girls and 5% of high school guys have been physically hurt by a dating partner within the last year. That's a pretty big number, especially when we consider that that is just physical violence. That does not include emotional abuse or sexual abuse within the context of a dating relationship. So I'd imagine that if we were just to talk about dating violence in general, that number would be much higher. And then with sexual assault, we see that 13% of high school girls in Kentucky and almost 3.5% of high school guys in Kentucky have been forced to have sexual intercourse against their will. I do know that this number is down 1 percentage point from the 2015 number for girls, so it used to be 14%. And the national average is about 10%. So Kentucky has higher rates for high school girls of sexual assault, which is pretty heartbreaking. I don't know why that is. But the fact that 1 in 10 girls across the country are being forced to have intercourse is pretty alarming, and one of the reasons why I do the work that I do is to train people how do we stop this from happening. Then ACEs, which we mentioned very briefly at the beginning. I'm not going to really go over these numbers because this isn't going to mean a whole lot to you. But if you look it up, these are the numbers for Kentucky. Right, Krista?
Yes, that's correct.
That ACEs number did not come from the Youth Behavioral Risk Survey. It came from a different source.
And another thing, too, is the ACEs out of the studies that we pulled that statistics from, and this also comes out of a lot of the work and a leadership team within Kentucky state government at the moment, and a movement called Kentucky Strengthening Families that focuses broad community support and trauma-informed care across a lot of different networks, from community and local public health departments, through schools, through organizations like public libraries, up through the judicial system and things like family courts. They want people to be aware of this information. And out of all of the states in the country, Kentucky ranks as the 5th state with the highest amount of adults living with 3 or more ACEs. So again, when you have time, perhaps after today's training, to learn a little bit more about that, you'll see why that is a significant statistic and how that relates to the other data presented.
Yeah, and I said that I wasn't going to talk about ACEs a whole lot, but now I'm like, I feel like we should talk about it just a little bit more. So Krista said that an ACE is an adverse childhood experience. So just for a very quick reference, an example of that would be having a parent who is in jail, or I believe that parents getting a divorce is considered an ACE. Going without food, like having to worry about food there's probably a time period on that for like 1 or 2 days.
Living with a family member with mental illness in the household.
Yes, and so these are things that happen to children, but that have been shown to have negative health outcomes well into adulthood, just for a very quick reference. So now that we know the scope of the problem and feel maybe a little bit sad about all of that, not our intention, but I do think, like I said before, we need to know the reality of what we're trying to address, that this is affecting and impacting a lot of people. And consistently when we do trainings in high schools, pretty much between 90 and 100% of students say that they know somebody who's experienced bullying, dating violence, or sexual assault, which is pretty large. And consistently over 60% say that they've experienced one of those things directly. So we know that these are issues. We know that they're impacting our teens and our kids. So what can we do about it? So here are some very basic introductions of a few different strategies and frameworks that Krista and I have used. So we're not going to get super into the weeds on any of these, but what we do want you guys to think about as we're going through here is, A, does this sound like I could apply this to my work, to the stuff that I do at the library? Could I get in on this? Could I incorporate this in any way? Or maybe on the opposite end of things, you'll listen to us talk and you'll be like, this doesn't make any sense to be doing in a library setting, or I can't figure out how we can do that. We are open to hearing both of those things and to discussing those at the end. And also, what are the things that you want to learn more about? Like I said, in October, I know that feels like a long way from now, but in October, we are going to be having a 201 of this, and Chris and I have not developed content for that yet. So that is very largely going to be based on your feedback, what you guys want to hear, what support you guys need and want around this. So before we dive in, I just wanted to give you guys that little advisory, I guess.
Absolutely. And don't feel like you have to wait and hold your questions until the end of the presentation or until we specifically solicit. We will have some more polls and another interactive reflective activity towards the end. But as you think of things, please feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat, and we will address topics, questions, and thoughts as they come up. So we're going to move into different strategies and frameworks, as Lori has mentioned. And this is our first one, looking at social emotional learning. And this is actually from the socialemotionallearning.org national website. It's really having quite a moment in the spotlight right now as we're talking about building more resilient communities, but also more empathetic and engaged young adults and citizens. Those of you all who may have already participated in some of the early literacy training around school readiness, you'll recognize social emotional learning as one of the 5 domains of the Kentucky definition of school readiness. So social emotional learning is alongside things like cognitive development, early math and science skills, early literacy skills, health literacy. Social emotional is just as significant, but it's really kind of a different way to contextualize things around relationship building and self-management, self-awareness skills. So I know that the details on this chart might be a little bit difficult to see, so I'll read those boxes as we're going along. But just what is social emotional learning, or SEL? Social emotional learning is the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary to understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. So those are all of the 5 quadrants on that graphic that you see in the middle of your screen. So how does SEL-centered education translate into real-world application? Funny enough, a big goal of the current government administration in the state of Kentucky is around programs that can support workforce development. One of the governor's first reports that they did in their first year in the administration was to poll various business owners, corporate organizations about what they were looking for so that they could attract more businesses to the state. And they said that they needed a better educated workforce. Well, when they drilled down into that data and to understand what employers meant by that, they were looking at a lot of soft skills that fell under social emotional learning, not as much of the things that can be taught, such as, trades or anything like that. So regardless of what your background or skill was, they're more concerned about your ability to problem solve, think critically, be a team player, work collaboratively, and be able to build trusting relationships in the workplace. So looking at some things such as empathy. Empathy is really the root of amazing customer service if we're looking at, whether we're looking at libraries or any service-oriented organization. Looking at something like impulse control. When you get an email that perhaps does not strike you the right way or brings up upsetting or difficult emotions, are you able to calm down and reflect and take time before you fire off an angry message? Emotional recognition. That simply means being able to notice or quote-unquote read the mood of a room and tailor your talk or your approach to whomever you'll be interacting with. Emotional management. We saw a little bit of this in our email example, but for instance, before you come into the workplace on any given day, if you had a recent family dispute, are you able to keep those emotions in check before going on about your day and your duties in the workplace? Communication, simply being able to listen, focus, and make the most of every relationship. Assertiveness, getting what you want and getting what you need, but also while respecting the needs and happiness of those around you. And again, problem solving, facing roadblocks, brainstorming solutions with ease. This is, again, really prominent in both national discussion around early childhood education. A lot of us may have grown up feeling that it needs to be perfect, or that if we could not do something perfect the first time, then we simply give up. So being able to learn from mistakes is a huge part of that problem-solving field. And so a lot of our programming that we do with teens and older children in libraries may not always look on the surface like they could be learning a tangible skill or a skill that can be easily quantified, because so much of what we are trying to focus on at that age is this more intangible, more abstract, more unseen soft set of social emotional skills. So anytime that you're getting individuals from different backgrounds, but especially children and teens, it's really good to see how you can make a comfortable, safe environment so that they can not only get to better know themselves, but be able to gain those and work on those skills of empathy to build these social emotional skill sets. And that brings us into the developmental assets, which those of you that may have seen presentations from myself in past summer reading conferences or different years, you may be familiar with this already. there will also be a handout at the end of today's webinar. The developmental assets were created by the Search Institute. It's been around for probably, I'd say, about 30 years almost. And again, this list is focused on adolescents, specifically in the ages of 12 to 18, but I have seen some recent work where they are doing this now across all ages. So an early childhood set, an older adult set too. But it is a list of 40 assets that are divided into two broader categories of 20 individual assets. So we have 20 external assets and 20 internal assets. And this is a really great way when you are trying to justify funding for library programs to be able to go back and directly tie in how your services are providing support to the community as well as the individual. So a lot of the external assets will focus on the four main categories of providing support to an individual, everything from family support to a caring neighborhood, which that's when they say a caring neighborhood, it means a young person experiences caring neighbors. So again, the library as a neighborhood organization would directly tie back to that asset. There's also areas of empowerment. Young people perceive that adults in the community value youth. Young people are given useful roles in the community. Young people are able to have places where they feel safe. That's in addition to their home and their school. Providing experiences that set boundaries and expectations. So neighbors take responsibility for monitoring young people's behavior. Lori mentioned this before, but that young people have other adults outside of their parents as positive role models for responsible behavior. And then constructive use of time. This may be the most explicit way to tie your library programming back to these assets, but that you have organizations that provide creative activities or youth programs where they spend 3 or more hours a week and having lessons in music, theater, arts, sports, clubs, or any sort of organization. So those are all the external assets. We compare those to the internal assets that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. So when they're talking about commitments to learning, they're talking about things such as a young person reports doing at least 1 hour of homework every school day, and that person feels motivated to do well and engage in active learning, up to reading for pleasure. So again, very library explicit. A young person reads for pleasure 3 or more hours per week, simply by the fact of having a library in a community and being open and providing literature and experiences for teens would be checking off that asset. We have positive values. So young people have safe spaces where they feel that they can stand up for their own personal beliefs, that they have an opportunity to reflect and demonstrate honesty, that they tell the truth even when it's not easy, that they have a place where they can take responsibility for their own actions. We also have social competencies, so everything from cultural competencies where young people have knowledge of and comfort with people of different cultural, racial, and ethnic backgrounds, to resistance, developing resistance skills where a young person can resist negative peer pressure in dangerous situations. And finally, 4 assets dedicated to positive identity, forming one's own positive identity. So again, programs, spaces, individuals that will help them define a sense of purpose, that their life has a purpose, and that they also have a view and goals for their personal future. So I'll move into this graphic from YALSA, which is the Young Adult Library Services Association division of the American Library Association, that shows how they are now encouraging public libraries to imbue their programming with the developmental assets as well as social emotional learning, and to this idea called connected learning. And connected learning is simply the act of putting teens first and putting teens in a position of leadership within developing programs, services, and outreach within the library framework. KDLA does have an archives webinar on this topic. If you would like to learn more, you can visit the Children and Young Adult Services page for a webinar called You Can Hamago To, Connected Learning and 21st Century Teen Services.
Before we jump into more connected learning, can I give a couple examples of like some of the workshops that people have used to incorporate developmental assets?
Yes, that would be wonderful.
So like Krista said, I work at Women's Crisis Center, and one of my colleagues, she works specifically with Scholar House, which is a residential program for parents, single parents usually, who are in basically earning their college degrees. And some of the things that we've been trying to do is develop some different programming incorporating the developmental assets that we can do with families. So a couple of the ideas that we've had, like we just recently had a Mommy and Me baking class, which was literally just having moms, because it ended up being moms. I don't know how many single dads are in the program, but it was moms and their kiddos, and we just decorated cupcakes. And so what you see is that one of the developmental assets is creative activities, so that the young person is engaging creatively in something. So they're being creative in what kinds of sprinkles and what kinds of flavors they want to put on their cupcake. And what we also see is that we're building positive family communication, which is another asset, because we're encouraging moms to speak kindly to their kids, to encourage what they're doing. Like, oh, I really love that sprinkle choice, or that cupcake looks great, or man, you are being so careful and so cautious with that cupcake. And so you're really building into that positive communication rather than criticism. And then you're building into family support, which is another asset. Another idea that we had was around Earth Day, because so many assets have to do with having adults outside of your parents or having a positive community. What if we were to do a neighborhood cleanup, which is a program that I feel like could translate pretty well to a library, especially if you're in a neighborhood and you have houses around you, or lots of like community members kind of tend to congregate or live around you. And what the neighborhood cleanup does is if it's done between family members, that could also be the positive family communication piece, but it also builds into that caring neighborhood, where you see other neighbors out and about caring about their neighborhood. And then there's also one about, I believe it's having high expectations. So the people in a child's life have high expectations for them and believe that they want to be basically imbuing a sense of responsibility. Like, hey, we take care of our community. We have pride for our community, and we have responsibility for it, which taking responsibility is another internal asset. So I hope that makes sense, the way that we have used developmental assets to build stronger individuals and stronger families. It can look pretty overwhelming when you're looking at a list of 40 assets, like what in the world am I supposed to do? But really, you could just look at one and be like, okay, so how could I focus on this one? And chances are whatever idea you come up with as a workshop or whatever, an event, is probably going to hit on one or two or three or four other assets as well.
And you might be surprised too if you look at your current calendar or services that you're offering, I guarantee you could find at least one of the assets that matches up and could justify your current program or service offerings. So with that, we have another interactive poll question, and I'll let Lori read this. I pull it down for you.
Yeah, so going back to, well, it's kind of, I guess it's an extension of connected learning. We're pulling in youth leadership. So we want to know, does your library have some kind of teen advisory board or council? And we have a few different options. Yes, you do have a teen advisory board or a council. No, we've never had that. No, we don't have one currently because we tried and it did not work for our specific community, or you're not really sure.
And these specific no answers, especially the we tried it, it did not work. That comes explicitly from feedback from Kentucky librarians who we have worked with and done this presentation live with before. So please do feel free to put into the chat maybe a few words that would describe your experiences, like why do you believe it did not work? At that time, would you be willing to try it again as circumstances were changed, and what are those circumstances or maybe even barriers that you feel that you need to overcome?
Because it looks like
the majority. That's interesting.
Most people have tried and had not seen a lot of success. So, okay, so couldn't get the teens involved as one. It's hard. There are lots of different demands for teens' time. And so if they're not already spending time at the library, it can be really difficult.
And that's one of the most common things that I hear about, well, how do we start teen services at my library? Or, you know, maybe my administrator doesn't understand and wants to shut this down because the numbers are just not the same as the crowds I pull in for story time. And I always say they're comparing apples and oranges, that there's a lot more of a burden of time and burden of responsibility for teens. And we make so many assumptions about them having this mystical free time that they actually, or even
most
resources.
That I know do not have free time.
No free time, but also transportation is very much a real barrier too.
Yeah. It looks like we've gotten some feedback from Melissa, Patricia also. So not that many teens using the library other than to pick up quick items. And trying it with different generations of teens.
Yes, teen services is very cyclical too. Sometimes something that may have worked 4 years ago may not work now. So we're not sure what it would take to get rolling here.
Yeah.
Another comment says, we are walking distance to one school which has no library of its own, but the students are in such a structured environment during the day that they don't want to do anything too structured after school.
Yeah.
The library is they hang out until the parents pick them up. Yes, that's something we hear too. Mm-hmm. That the traditional model of a traditional tab or tag or things like that are just asking a lot out of teens on their own free time.
Yeah, and I definitely get that. And I want to say, as we're doing this, before we move on to the next kind of piece, so youth leadership or a teen advisory board can be a great way of engaging teens. If you have teens who feel like maybe they have that time in their schedule, or if you feel teens who don't have that transportation issue. But it is most certainly not the answer for everybody. We ourselves are just starting a teen council, and this is making me wonder, because we are having most of our meetings at the library, so it's not necessarily like the burden is on the library itself to provide or build the scaffolding or the structure for this teen council. But we're coming into the library, and that's a program that we are leading, but it's actually in that space. And so I wonder if there are different, like if it's different like interest areas. I don't know what the typical things that a teen council or a youth advisory board do in the library setting, but maybe like it can't just be to provide feedback on the library, right?
Right, good question. It really is individual to the library, and I would also argue it's individual to the skill set of the teens that you have at that time. You know, I remember when I started teen librarianship, I walked into an older group made up of mostly juniors and seniors, and they had been invested in the program for several years, so they were able to pull off things like, you know, these bake sales or these service learning projects that then a couple of years later after they graduated and I had to start all over again, very different when you have younger middle school students who may be just getting them to show up and bring friends to art club.
It can be tough.
Yeah.
And it looks like, so Patricia has the same issue as Melissa, but also there's kind of a unique issue, or I guess barrier, not an issue, that's what I meant to say. But a unique challenge with accessing or engaging students with disabilities.
Interesting.
Okay.
Well, thank you all for sharing.
Thank you guys for sharing that. I would definitely be interested in exploring that more, either in October or on a different day, or even later today. I don't know. But I want to make sure that we get to our final technique or strategy that we're going to talk about for this particular day. Again, this is not an exhaustive list. We've only really scratched the surface on a few ways that we have engaged teens and that we have built into teens in the past. And so, yeah, and then we'll discuss afterward. If we want to go back to any of them, we totally can. But I want to make sure that I give the time to introduce this program, because this is what I do. This is one of the things that I spend the majority of my day doing. This is one of the reasons that I got involved in this work at the very beginning. So Green Dot is specifically a violence prevention program or strategy. It started, as Krista indicated, at the University of Kentucky it was probably 12 years ago, 13 years ago. Sorry, I didn't mean to date you there. But it started a little while ago, and there are many cool things about Green Dot, but one of the most profound things I find, and the most impactful things, is that this is a strategy that has been studied. It's been studied at the college level, and it has been studied at the high school level, and in both cases it was found to be effective in decreasing the perpetration of sexual assault and other kinds of violence, which is really exciting. This is an evidence-based strategy, and when we talk about violence prevention, there are not a ton of evidence-based strategies out there. So I want to tell you a little bit about what it is. So we have this map here, and maybe you guys have seen a map similar where if you're looking at, recently we had it's the E. coli outbreak with the romaine lettuce, and you probably have seen a map on the news somewhere with a bunch of red dots. And each red dot symbolizes, every time somebody ate E. coli romaine lettuce, and has gotten sick or whatever. Mm-hmm. So if you watch zombie movies, these maps are very common, right? And each red dot indicates whatever that virus is. And Green Dot actually takes that image and we apply it to violence prevention. But instead of each red dot being one virus, each red dot represents a single point in time, a single decision that somebody has made to hurt somebody else. So it is that decision that a teen makes to maybe share a nude photo of an ex, whether that is they text their friends with it or they post it on social media. That is a red dot. A red dot is the moment that somebody chooses to call their dating partner worthless, or to say, no one else was ever going to love you. A red dot is the moment that somebody makes fun of one of their classmates because they don't have the right shoes, or because they wore the same clothes 2 days in a row. Whatever that is, each of those represent one decision, and they're one red dot on our map, and our map is covered in red dots. And we don't know how many exactly are on our community maps, like the map of Kentucky, but what we do know is that they're enough to sustain those numbers, like 1 in 10 and 12% and 13% and 22%, like what we had gone over before. So what Green Dot proposes is that the solution has to match the problem. And so the solution is a green dot. So just like a red dot is one person's individual action, a green dot is also one person's individual action. It's just that a green dot is that one person's action to stop a red dot from playing out. So maybe we actually receive that nude picture, and instead of laughing or instead of spreading it around further, we talk to the person who sent it out and we say, hey, what are you doing? That is creepy. You should probably not send that out. Or maybe you check in on the target. Those are both green dots, just to make sure that that person's doing okay, Or maybe you see a couple arguing at school, or as adults we could see this at a restaurant, at a movie theater, at the grocery store, in a parking lot, wherever you are, you see a couple arguing and it's escalating. You don't know the couple, so you don't really want to run up to them and be like, hey, stop it, I see what you're doing, it's not okay. But maybe you can create a distraction. Maybe you accidentally lose track of your cart, and it runs like you run past them trying to chase down your cart. Or maybe you pretend to drop something, or you do drop something, you pick it up and you ask, oh, hey, did one of you guys drop this $5 bill? I saw it on the ground. Or did you drop your receipt? Or maybe we've had students say things like they would do cartwheels down the hall. We have had students who have leaned on their horn when they've seen something escalate in a parking lot. We've seen students say that they would make whale calls. Like whatever it is to interrupt that red dot from playing out. And then we also give them the option to, so maybe making a distraction and directly intervening isn't exactly what you feel is in your power, then you get somebody else. So maybe that's a trusted adult. That's what teens generally have spent their entire lives hearing, is to tell a trusted adult. But maybe it's just, if you're shy, you get your outgoing friend to say something. Or if you don't know the person, or you don't like the person who is receiving that violence, then maybe you get their friend to say something. So I don't like this person, but I know you care about them, so you might want to go check on them. Sorry, I don't know if you guys can hear that, but there was a giant truck that was doing some weird noise thing, and I was like, oh dear goodness. So I'm just going to call it out and apologize for that.
And there's lots of other things too besides directly participating in bystander intervention in an escalating scenario. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of work that can be done and just, breaking down norms, or conversely maintaining norms. So one of my favorite examples that stands out to me from my first years in this training was just simply people making jokes that perpetuate gender stereotypes or some sort of violence. Just simply feeling empowered enough to say, that's not funny.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So those are other simple tactics to get involved.
And the idea is that when we have more green dots than red on the map is when our numbers from violence will go down. That's when we'll have shifted norms to where people are less likely to just accept things the way they are. So that is green dot in a very, very, very brief nutshell. What I want to tell you guys is that, so I'm the person who does green dot, or one of the people who does green dot for Northern Kentucky and Buffalo Trace, but there are actually rape crisis educators all over the state, and we have a map on your screen right now, and there is one rape educator for each of these regions. So if you can't, I believe this is uploaded as a handout, right?
Yes.
If you look, you'll be able to find, what is the rape crisis center for your area. You can either email me with your county, or say hey, I live in Pike County, and it looks like that's Mountain Comprehensive Care. And then just send that to me. My email address would be, it's on the last slide, which we'll get to in a second. And I can try and connect you with the person from there. If you are from that region, they're actually currently between educators. So Mountain Comp Care does not currently have an educator, but I would put you on my radar so that when they do, I can hook you guys up. Because I meet monthly with all of these educators. So if you want to partner, feel free to send an email to me. What we thought it would be kind of fun to do is to actually pull up some more poll questions and give you guys kind of the experience of what we go through when we train students. So these are, if you've ever seen the show, What Would You Do? It's kind of like that, only in a PowerPoint form. So we give you a scenario and we ask, what would you do? And we actually do this with our students because we find that it's really important for them to know that they have options. So let's practice. So say you overhear some teens talking about a super embarrassing photo that was posted on social media of another teen. This is a very common scenario that I hear. So would you direct, you would check in with the subject of the photo? Would you be kind of a different direct, and you would ask them who posted it and ask that person to take it down? Would you delegate? You encourage or ask them to report it to the site, or would you distract? You challenge them to bury the post with positive somethings, whatever they are.
And just a reminder, too, when you're responding to these polls, it's anonymous. There are no names tied, so we don't know who individually is responding. We just see 3 people said that they would be direct.
Yeah. And Also, there's no right or wrong answer. Or there's no wrong answer. They're all right answers, which is kind of the best kind of test to take. Okay, so it looks like most of you guys would ask them who posted it and ask that person to take it down, which makes a lot of sense. Sometimes when I do this with library professionals and I have a little bit more time, what I'll do is I'll give you guys a scenario that is, what is your perspective? What would you do as a library professional when you're handling teens? And then I give you the same scenario, but only you are a teen. You're a peer in this situation. So this is the next question. It's also just something fun to talk about or to think about.
I realize my question is not.
Krista's pulling the question up now. So I'm going to go ahead and read it out, and then you'll answer after I'm finished reading it out. So you see a teen who used to be a regular, but you haven't seen them in a while. They're with their new dating partner, who seems to be talking to your regular in a really demeaning fashion. So maybe they're saying something like, you're worthless or whatever. Direct, you say, ouch, for that person. That sounded pretty harsh. Delegate, you ask the branch manager to say something to the aggressor. Or would you distract? You approach them and ask, oh, I'm so glad you're here. We got in this book. I think you'll love it. Let me show you. Nice. And for me personally, I'll say this because most of you guys have answered both questions now. For me personally, I am almost never a direct person.
And I am very much a direct person, so it is interesting to see people's personalities play out in these questions.
And that's what we love about Green Dot is that, like, it really is, like, I think students have spent their entire lives hearing the message. Like, you have one option. If you see something, you say something. And that say something feels very much like you directly confront somebody or you tell on them. And those just don't seem doable for a lot of people. So we're about like, okay, so what is the doable thing for you? Because what we care about is that you're keeping people safe and that you are safe yourself. So it looks like in that one, nobody delegated.
Yeah, that's interesting. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're coming to the top of the hour, but I really appreciate those of you that can stick around for just a few more minutes as we wind down today's training to help us work through our final reflective exercise, which you can answer in the chat. Just take a few moments to think about everything we've discussed in the last hour. Let us know what has impacted you, what has stood out to you most about this training, whether it was something new that you learned or things that made you think about. What's a simple first step that you can take when you return to your routines and to your library work in your own communities to implement any of the strategies we discussed today? And lastly, almost most importantly, maybe selfishly, what can myself and Lori as trainers do as a follow-up? Again, we'll have one more slide with that save the date for the October webinar. We would really love to hear suggestions about how to make this these exercises more meaningful, more impactful, or what further resources you need in your toolbox. So we'll take a few minutes and let you all think and type into the chat. And again, no wrong answers. We also see this as a safe environment to think and reflect. So it might be a little bit quiet here as we're winding down.
These are also these are deeper questions. These are the kinds of things where I'm like, I wish I could be in a room with you guys and just talk and talk and talk and talk. Especially going back to, because you guys had a lot of thoughts about the youth leadership, and so that sounds like it might be a good topic for, or a good partial topic for the one in October, because there was so much about that. Nice, yeah. Patricia, that always felt more accessible to me too, is like we all see these things happening and being posted online, whether that's pictures or whether that is somebody tweeting something really mean, just checking in on the person who it's about. Lots of my high school students talk about subtweeting, which is like where someone will post something mean about somebody else, but they won't actually say their name, but everybody else knows who they're talking about. And so, like, if you know who they're talking about, like, just reaching out and being like, hey, I saw that. Are you okay?
Yeah, for those of you in the recording, in case the chat does not show up, the comment said, I like the idea of checking in with the person being targeted by cyberbullying. It seems very kind and directly helpful in counteracting the effects of that negative, that intrusive act, acknowledging their probable reaction. So thank you for sharing that. Are there any other questions, thoughts, comments? There is our direct contact information if you feel more comfortable emailing us one-on-one individually or after you've even had some time to reflect, because we've given you a lot of information in a very short amount of time and some information that is a little bit different from what we traditionally talk about in library services. So this is a little bit of a paradigm shift in how we approach services for teens and young adults.
Yeah. And if you're interested in learning more about Green Dot, I've actually done a couple of webinars on Green Dot specifically that I could try to find links on. I know the Nebraska Consortium for Libraries or Nebraska Library Commission, I did one for them, and all their stuff is totally free and open to the public. So there's always that, and I can find the link for that too. I kind of forgot about it until this moment, but.
So now we've just moved into our wrap-up slides, and appreciate you all sticking around for this. You do have the download box in the bottom left-hand portion of your screen where you can get the slides from today's training, as well as that really great map of regional contacts and trainers that Lori provided. We also have a one-pager of just some various articles, videos, supplemental resources, all about preventing violence, as well as teen-centered and teen leadership strategies, and then a handout of the 40 developmental assets. Anytime you want to share your thoughts or to look for future and upcoming trainings, make sure that you are signed up for the Kayak listserv. That's the KDLA facilitated email distribution list that's on all things children and teen related. This is often our first stop where we publicize all of our webinars, and we also do a weekly Friday digest curated of different training opportunities. If you or yourself are on there but you have a colleague that may not be, please do encourage them to sign up. You can also find more resources to support your youth programming and outreach on the website for the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives. You can find everything from on-demand training to book kits and thematic program kits on different topics from serving children aged preschool through high school and family. If you would like to recommend a resource or a theme to develop into any sort of circulating kit, you have my email address. Please just shoot me a quick message at krista.kingoaks@ky.gov. I also want to take this opportunity, since we are probably less than a month away from kicking off many of our summer reading programs, that we have an entirely separate summer reading support website with a plethora of resources. So just make sure to look for that on your drop-down menu of programs under librarians. And then this week we will have our final youth services webinar for the spring season. Just a reminder that we do take the summer off while all of our libraries are busy with summer reading, and we will pick back up in the fall again, most likely, I think, with our Preventing Violence 201 webinar. So, but if you have not had a chance to do so already, please register for our final webinar of the season, everything you want to know about youth services but were too scared to ask. Don't forget, you can follow KDLA on social media and learn all about our continuing education support services through Twitter and Facebook. And then again, we thank you for participating today, and want to remind you to please help us keep our IMLS support going. If you click on the, there's a box there to the left of the chat screen that says survey link. Please click on the title, Preventing Violence 101 Survey, hit the button Browse To, and it will pop open a new screen where it will take you to that very brief survey. It should take no more than 2 minutes to complete. Thank you again for your time today. I'm going to end today's recording, but we'll stick around and be available for questions in the chat for a few more minutes. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you guys so much.